Hi and welcome. My name is Marie and I'm the founder of Unfunk Your Soul. Unfunk Your Soul is a collective, a movement, a brand that unites, founded out of my desire to honor my journey and to introduce you to mind body practices to unfunk yourself. In this next episode, I'll be talking about misogyny and that kind of point or that kind of query. At what point in a man's life does it become apparent and that transition that it becomes okay by their standards to speak about women in such negative, derogatory terms? So through conversations with friends and children, it kind of becomes clear, and I'm purely talking from a female perspective, myself being a person who identifies as a woman, and my experience, so my own personal experience of misogyny, of being on the receiving end of some quite disturbing comments from strangers, and how we as women almost have to prepare, whether it's our children or relatives or perhaps young people that you work with, you almost have to prepare them to deal with these random comments, how we almost have to encourage our young females to police themselves, because it becomes more and more apparent that there's an expectation or sometimes blaming of women and girls for asking for trouble if they don't portray themselves in a certain way, if they don't dress a certain way, if they have to kind of monitor their behaviors and their interactions in case something happens. And I know in the media there may be different stories about situations that happened. And recently I'd watched a TV show that was geared and aimed at keeping women safe when they were out living their lives. So there was numerous different types of alarms that they could sound if they were in a crisis or an emergency, that there was different ways of repelling men, and legal ways to do it. So women can't, not only do they have to carry these things to protect themselves, they also then have to be mindful of what they're carrying with themselves to protect themselves, because then they could be seen as a perpetrator, even though they're vulnerable. And the majority of the time, if women are attacked, it's going to be by someone who is potentially more physically powerful. In the power dynamics are going to be swung in a way that the woman is going to be the potentially injured party in that interaction. And it kind of takes me back. There was one time that kind of sticks in my mind as a woman in her 30s. That was me. It was during the day, so I don't know whether it was morning or afternoon, daylight. And on this occasion, I had left a car park and I was walking to my place of work, which was an office in the centre of town. Walking down the street, cars passing me, not really thought anything about it. I was obviously juggling bags and wasn't really paying that much attention to cars coming and going. And as I turned towards my right, I seen a car slowing down. And as they were slowing down, I could see that the passenger was winding down the window. So my natural assumption is that perhaps they're slowing down and they want directions. this is what I thought. So I kind of looked at them thinking, okay, you know, I'm going about my business. If they need directions, I'll happily give them. So I can see the window being wound down. And there was two men in the car, one male passenger, one driving. I don't know, perhaps they were in their early 30s. It's hard to gauge, really. I didn't really pay that much attention at the time. And as they slowed down, pulled alongside me, I looked in, and then the driver shouted out of the window towards me, "Oh, I'd effing give her one." And followed by something else, which I think is just really too crude to repeat. And then they proceeded to laugh and then drive off. And I was in that shock. It didn't quite dawn on me what had happened until after they'd driven off. And I love the word audacity because it's the word I keep on using quite often these days. And the audacity of these men to think that it was okay to do that is beyond me. And as they drove off, and they drove that fast from me, I didn't even have time to get my phone out to take a picture of the car and get the registration. I was in that much shock and that disbelief and furiousness. I was so angry. It's like, how dare they? How dare they think that's okay to do that? So it's like, at what point do boys become teenagers, become men that think that that kind of behavior is okay? And what kind of graduation, at what point in life are they graduating to that point where they think it's okay to sexualize a stranger, shout out obscenities through a car window at that person they don't know, and even if they did know the person, it's still out of order, to a perfect stranger going about their business? Why would they think that's okay to do that? So at what point do boys become those men that think that that's okay? Now, I say boys becoming men because in my interactions with my own children and through conversations that they've been privy to or what they've overheard in their school, and I'm talking high school, I'm talking between the years of year 9 and year 11. So is that 13 to 16, 14 to 16, that age group? And some of the conversations that they've kind of relayed back to me have been quite disturbing and quite frightening, to think that youth today are speaking about females, their peers, in such derogatory terms, and they think it's bants, or they think that's okay, or they don't think because they're only joking, you know, we shouldn't be so serious, and why we were just joking. But every time you say something that is hyper-sexualized or disregarding of people's feelings and how that could land with them, and that kind of disregard really of other people's feelings, is quite scary. And I mean, for me, I mean, I'm a parent of daughters, so I haven't got that kind of immediate influence of having male young people around me in some respects. But I would like to think that if I had any males, young boys, teenagers in my immediate vicinity, that I would educate them from a woman's perspective. And it's kind of like, well, I'm sure parents wouldn't like to know that their sons are speaking about women in such derogatory terms. But I kind of I suppose part of my concern or kind of fear is that it's not challenged enough when young people are talking like this. And are we empowering our girls to stand up for themselves, or do they allow it to happen because no one else is challenging it? And it's sometimes it's just language, and it's that kind of ignoring of the small stuff, and because it's not an act of violence, then okay, we'll just let that one slide. Then it's just, they're just saying this, they're just saying that, and unless they're taught what's appropriate language and how they should refer to women, how are they going to know if how are they going to learn from it? How are they going to change the language if they're not challenged on it? And I was talking to a friend the other night, and it was just a case of, I mean, she has a grandson, and she sees it as her duty to educate him and for him to be an ally and to be grown up, to be brought up in an environment where we challenge that unacceptable language, or we're a voice for those that are more vulnerable. And that was quite refreshing to obviously have that conversation. And she says the same with her husband, is that he lives in a house which is predominantly a female strong household, and works with other women. So like she says he doesn't have a choice. He has to be an ally. But there's part of that, there is a choice. And for men to realize that just by their very presence, even if they aren't being overly aggressive or aren't being overly vocal, it can still intimidate women because it is just a man. And I don't think a lot of men realize how that makes women feel, is that they feel vulnerable without even a man having to open their mouth and say anything or do anything, that women will still feel intimidated by them just because it's a man. And I know that when like if you're walking down the street and there's a man walking behind you and he's just rushing about his business, he's just going to wherever he's, all his things is getting to his next destination. He's not thinking he's walking behind a woman. He's got a faster pace. He's speeding up behind her. He's not thinking to cross the road. He's just thinking to get into his place and to where he's going. And for a man to have that awareness of how his very presence can intimidate someone and take steps to minimize that fear that woman may have, is such a huge thing. It's such a small thing, but it can make such a big difference. And so women wouldn't have to have TV shows made to highlight all these gadgets that women can carry. Oh yeah, and another thing with the gadgets, it was like these apps that women can download on their phone that will contact their emergency numbers, that will give them their location, that will start videoing, that will start recording. Why should we have to go tooled up when we want to go about our business? Why do we have to monitor what we're wearing because men can't control themselves? So therefore then we need to wear shrouds, and we need to make sure we have sensible shoes on so we can make a run for it, or that we have to carry devices and implements to protect ourselves. Why should we have to protect ourselves from men? Why can't men just do better? And it was just this kind of like, why we have to have these conversations with our young girls about protecting themselves, or what to do if some man makes an advance for you and you decline, and like he may get angry at the fact that you've turned him down. And it's such a horrid way of having a rite of passage for being born female, and having to have that rite of passage. Why is that so? Why aren't boys given that rite of passage about how to be a better ally to women? And I know that even during lockdown number 1, we were all walking all over the place, going out for our daily walks. And I recall walking along a dual carriageway with my children at the time. So I think they may have been 11, 12. And there was a white van. And the driver or whoever proceeded to shout something out. I can't remember what words it was said, but obviously I was with my two youngest, and they made some comment towards me, us, or whatever as a group. And one of my daughters was saying, "Do you know him?" I'm like, "Absolutely not. I have no idea who it was." And she was like, "Why is he shouting at you as he's driving past?" "I have no idea why he's shouting at me. Some men think it's okay to do that," was my response. And then I proceed to school her and educate her on the fact that some men just think that that's okay. And I say some men because it's not all men, but those individuals that do that, they're the ones that stay in your mind. They're the ones that years later, their words and what they said still impact you and still affect you to a certain extent. They're the ones that you refer to when you're telling your daughters to be careful, to not put themselves in situations where they can be victimized in some respects, having to gatekeep how they interact with boys, and to be mindful about how their interactions could lead to some situations that can spiral out of control, all because there's some boys, some men who think that it's okay, or think that they can treat people badly and there'll be no consequence for it. It completely baffles me. It baffles me that still women are having to gatekeep themselves in order to keep themselves safe. And even when they do that, there's still men, boys that will cross that line, that will proceed to harm girls and women, whether that's verbally, whether that's physically, they will still do it. And it's that kind of realization that we need more allies. We need more people to call out those behaviors. We need more people to stand up and be counted. We need more men to cross the road when they see lone females walking, or if they see a situation that is getting a bit out of hand and some lads are taking their banter a bit too far. We need people to step up and call them out on it. We need people to say that that is not on. You do not speak to women like that. You do not talk like that, and call it out. Call it out for what it is. It's misogyny. And we need to do better for our women and girls going forward. And I think everybody has a role to play. It's not just down to girls and women to keep themselves in check. We need men, boys to keep themselves in check and also call out this terrible behavior that is still happening. It's still on a day-to-day, and it's not fair. And like I said, we shouldn't have to school our girls on how to keep safe when they have a right to do what they want when they want, and we shouldn't have to gatekeep. So thank you for listening to this episode of Unfunk Your Soul. Make sure that you rate and follow everywhere that you listen to your podcast, and keep up to date with the latest episode by clicking notifications.